Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. My name is Yona Verwer of the Jewish Art Salon, and I want to first of all thank the curators, Dorit, Dotan, and Judith, Jospeh, as well as the support team, Cheselyn, Amato, and Chana, Wiesenthal, Elias. They will announce the presenters today. So I just want to make a quick announcement that the Jewish Art Salon also is starting an art critique program this Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Eastern time. We also have one that's more accessible for Europe and Israel later on in the season. Anyone is allowed to attend. You can just watch or give your input, but you do need to sign up if you want to attend, and I will put that in the chat. And with that, I will give it back to Dorit.
Thank you, Yona, and good evening, everybody. At first, I would like to say that my hearts and prayers goes to the Ukrainians, and hopefully the war is going to be end quickly, and we're all going to have a deep breath of relief of that heaviness. So welcome to the Jewish Art Salon Open Studios program. Today we will present two artists, Rachel Kanter and Billha Zussman. Also, our program includes Curator Dvora Liss, who will talk about work of late Helene Aylon, who was a well-known artist and founding member of the Jewish Art Salon. Please raise a Zoom hand symbol, I hope you all know what it is by now, to ask a question. If you have comments, write it in the chat. Time is limited, so please be sure you are asking a question. And I don't know, Dvora Liss might be leaving earlier, so if you have questions after her presentation, please, you can ask immediately by then. The next program, Biblical Narratives, will be on March 20 with Richard McBee and Robert Brandwein. Rachel Kanter, our first presenter, is a fiber artist using quilting and embroidery techniques while incorporating vintage textiles, sewing patterns, furniture, and found objects into her work. Her interests lie in the combination of history and tradition with modern ideas about Judaism. Her work is equally inspired by traditional Jewish rituals and texts and traditional women's handwork and crafts. So Rachel, please share your screen.
My name is Rachel Kanter, and I just want to really thank the Jewish Art Salon for this program. It's such a wonderful program, and for everyone who works on it. And I'm thrilled to be in such good company today discussing my art. This first piece, I thought this would be a good place to start because I made this piece 18 years ago, and I had gone to a pro-choice rally in Washington, D.C. in 2004 with my two very young children and other family members. And at this rally, my brother took these photographs, my brother Zev. And it was at this point in my life where I was really beginning to use Jewish ritual objects and Jewish texts to talk about things important to me, being a woman and a feminist. This piece is right now in the permanent collection at the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt in Germany, and it's a tallis. The next piece is called Eshet Chayil, and it is a set of Days of the Week towels. It's based on vintage embroidered towels, kitchen towels, and on the vintage towels, every day of the week they show a woman doing a different task at home. I'm sure some of you have seen them in antique stores or flea markets. And usually in these towels on Sunday, the woman then is going to church. So I took the tasks on these towels, on my towels, are taken from the Eshet Chayil prayer, which is a prayer that is usually sung to a wife by her husband on Shabbat evening. And the tasks that are sung about in this prayer are plant, spin, weave, sew, cook, and serve. The last day of the towel, the last day of the week towel, is Shabbat. And on the towel, you can see that the woman is, after being praised for all these things she's doing in the home, looks out the window on the towel and sees a synagogue and is not there. It's Shabbat. Her husband's at synagogue, but she's not there because there's no place for her at the synagogue. The next piece is actually a different shot of the piece that was on the press for this Open Studios program. This piece is called Laundry. When my daughter was 15 years old, and she's now 20, she was walking into town and a stranger cat called her. He didn't say anything really crude. It was more like, hey there, cutie, give me a smile. But the words made her so uncomfortable. And it was the first time that someone had commented on her appearance in a way that felt like an invasion of privacy. After this incident, I started working on this piece, Laundry, to highlight the words that women are regularly called that are demeaning, unwanted, and hurtful. The piece is about washing clothes as purification. These are all talit katan from a pattern that I made, talit katan for women, I should say. They don't have the tzitzit on them yet, but if you look closely, you can see the holes in the corners of them where the tzitzit would be. The words that are embroidered on each of the women's talit katan are in the process of being washed out and removed. The dye in the thread stains the undergarments, just as the hurtful words that are said every day to women leave a mark on them. And the words in this piece are ditzy, bossy, neurotic, shrill, nag, diva, frumpy, prude, dramatic, bitchy, slut, and hormonal. It was important to me that the words were on these undershirts and not on clothing that people regularly see, because when women are called these names and are catcalled, the pain and the damage isn't usually visible. It is internalized and kept quiet. This next group of pieces were made in a time when I was really starting to re-examine Jewish ritual and ritual objects. And I wanted these Jewish objects that I was making to reflect my experience as a woman and to communicate my ideas as a woman. So this first piece is called Fringe Garment. It's made from a vintage apron pattern from the 1940s, and it's in the permanent collection of the Jewish Museum in New York City. Before I started this series, I was thinking about making a talit for myself personally, what I would call a woman's talit, because the ones that I regularly see in synagogue look like I consider men's talit. And I wanted to make a talit that was not using the vocabulary from a men's talit, that did not look like a men's talit, but it needed to be functional. It needed to stay on while I prayed and wrangled my kids at synagogue, where I went every Saturday. So I took the idea of a priest's robe from the time of the temple, which was a ritual object, but a very functional one, where the priest would have to wear while they were doing all the incense and the sacrifice and the burning. And I combined that idea with a very functional, traditional woman's garment, which is the apron. So this piece has the four corners, has the tzitzit, but it definitely does not look like a traditional talit. This next piece is also part of that series. It's called God's Aspect, and it's based on a pattern from the 1970s, and it's inspired by a midrash on how God appears to the Israelite people. And in this midrash, God is said to appear as a mighty man waging war. God appears as a pedagogue who teaches a lesson every day. And God appears as an elder teaching Torah and as a young man. And the end of this midrash, it says, God appeared to them in a guise appropriate to each and every place and time. But all these appearances of God are as a man. So I thought, what if God appeared not as a man of war, or not as a young male scholar, but as a woman? What if God appeared as a woman like you and like all of us? So this talit is made from a women's apron pattern. It's made out of silk, so you can see through it. And while a woman wearing this talit, you can see her. You can see her body through it, and you can see her as the image of God. The next piece is called Immersion Loss, and it's part of a series of spiritual mikvahs. I wanted to create a piece that looked at a mikvah differently, that could be used as a conceptual mikvah if you didn't want to go to a mikvah or you couldn't go to a mikvah. And I wanted to expand the idea of going to the mikvah from beyond, as a woman, just going after you are done with your period or before you get married. So this is a spiritual mikvah, and its use is to mark a time in your life when you are faced with knowledge, when you were faced with the knowledge that something has ended, when you have a loss, such as the closing of a synagogue, the weaning of a child, going through menopause, or leaving your community. It's the idea of a loss of potential, of possibility, and a loss of continuity. Using this, which I created it to actually be used, the woman would wrap herself in it and recite prayers that ask, plead, and thank God for the strength and understanding to emerge from the loss that she is experiencing renewed. The next piece is part of a new series I'm making called Tafrichim, which are burial shrouds. In the Jewish tradition, tafrichim are simple white shrouds used to bury the dead. They are traditionally hand-sewn from white linen or cotton and are made without pockets, buttons, or zippers. These plain, unadorned garments are free of any symbol of status or wealth and emphasize the belief in human equality. This piece is called Tafrichim 1, and it is a burial shroud for democracy. It was made just a couple of years ago, and it's made from vintage American flags and hand-dyed cotton. And in this set of burial shrouds, I've included a shirt, pants, and a head covering. The next piece is the third one in my series, and this one is a burial shroud for the earth. This one is made from commercial cotton. It is printed with a photograph that I took that I had professionally printed on fabric of a lake in the woods behind the house where I grew up in Syracuse. The final two pieces that I want to talk about, and I feel I forgot to set my timer, so I don't know how I'm doing time-wise, but I think I'm doing okay. I apologize for that. The final two pieces are much quieter in what they're saying about my ideas about women and feminism, but to me, they're really not any less important. And so this piece is called With Our Hands, and it's based on the Jewish text from Exodus about the building of the Mishkan. And during that time, the Israelites were commanded to gather specific materials to create the Mishkan. And it was not only the materials, but it was men and women. The whole community had to build the sacred space. So this piece is a curtain from the Mishkan, and it's made up of vintage quilt blocks by anonymous women. I don't know who these women are. I assume most of them aren't Jewish. I got them in central New York and the rural areas around there. So I'm sure they're not made by Jewish women. The hand image is my hand that is in the center of all these quilt blocks. And then the names that you see in the detail are names of women from the yard site list at my synagogue where I grew up in Syracuse. And so I take their names sort of as they're specific to people. Some of them I know from growing up there, but they're also like this generalized idea of women. So this piece really represents how today the work of women in creating and maintaining community and sacred spaces really isn't acknowledged. And I can think about the synagogue where I grew up and maintaining that sacred space. I can think about the synagogue I am now. I can think about many organizations. This piece really, to me, celebrates all the anonymous women who are the builders and keepers of sacred spaces. And one thing I just will mention, the underside of it, and you can see in the full shot, is made up of vintage talit. And the last piece, which you can see on the screen, and it's also behind me in the Zoom, is my newest piece. It's called Scrap Bag. It's made from vintage denim. It's made from fabric from my mother's scrap bag she sewed. The shirt is from her scrap bag. I assume the shirt was meant for me or my sister. And it's also made from vintage embroidery floss that is from my grandmother's sewing supplies. Well, this piece is very personal, and it's about my memories. To me, it's really about the acknowledgement of the traditional handwork and crafts that women have always done and maybe not been acknowledged for. When I find an old quilt in an antique store or a bag of vintage fabrics, I look at them and can see the women who spent hundreds of hours sewing to make something useful and beautiful, something that so often they would give to someone else, and something that eventually would be discarded, like the quilts and the quilt blocks in the previous piece that I would find at antique stores. When I look at these works, I can hear the stories of these women. I want to remember the nameless, faceless women who created them, and I want to acknowledge them. And when I look at these pieces, and whether it's an embroidered tablecloth, a vintage embroidered tablecloth that I put on my Shabbat table and we sit around and we eat with, or when I look at an antique quilt, or I use pieces of the antique material in my work, I like to say and I like to think that this was touched by a woman's hand. And to me, that's really important. So I hope I did it in the time allotted, and I know I threw so much information, but I would love to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I just wanted to comment on one piece, the unfinished quilt blocks you found, acknowledging women's unrecognized work. It also reminded me of the phrase from Pirkei Avot, it's not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. The idea that, sometimes women don't get to finish their quilts.
Yeah.
They start something and it does remain unfinished, and it's very poignant. My mother is a quilter and she does have some unfinished projects. So that really spoke to me. I do see some questions in the chat, and Chana Wiesenthal, you had a question about the apron. Would you please unmute and ask your question?
Sure, yes, and thank you so much for a really beautiful presentation. So deep, and there's so much to look at here. I did have a question about the apron. I did hear you say that it was drawn upon from the apron that the priests wore. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if it incorporates as well any kind of auditory element, like the bells that were at the bottom of the vestments that the priests wore.
It doesn't, although I will say when I really made these talit with the intention that they would be worn as in my life, and in my experience, they would be worn in synagogue while dealing with my children. So maybe my children would be that auditory part of the piece.
Understood. Thank you.
Rachel, wonderful seeing you and obviously your work. Two kind of practical questions. One, can you either maybe put it in the chat, the midrash that you talked about, how God appears to the Jewish people. I'd be interested in finding that midrash inside. It's certainly a fascinating,
I will put it in the
almost
chat.
Horrifying notion, frankly, but really great. Secondly, the kind of question I hate to hear people ask, but talis katan for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally ignorant of this. How many women actually wear a talis katan?
I mean, there are. I don't think it's so popular, but first of all, you could Google it. You can buy them. They look like undershirts.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I wear men's talis katan.
Right. Yeah. They look like tank tops, and I don't think it's a lot, but I do think more and more people do. And I also think that this idea, and this is for a whole other topic, but I think the idea of gender is changing. And I think that the idea of men and women and how people identify is changing. And so I think a talit katan is for a person. And I think there are people who are wearing them.
We're going to move on to our next presenter. Dvora Liss is the Judaica curator at Ein Harod Museum of Art in Israel. She will speak about artist Helene Aylon, who was born, raised, and schooled in the Orthodox tradition in Borough Park, Brooklyn. Aylon married an Orthodox rabbi at age 18 and lived the life of a rabbi's wife until his untimely death the week of her 30th birthday. In the last years of the marriage, Aylon studied art at Brooklyn College with Ad Reinhardt, who encouraged her greatly. She taught art at San Francisco State University and had a significant art career with work in permanent collections, including the Jewish Museum in New York. She died in 2020 from complications of the COVID virus, and she was a founding member of the Jewish Art Salon.
Helene Aylon, so many of you know who she is, and I just really want to talk about my own experience in curating 2 shows for her. She obviously is an amazing woman, and those of you who know her, we're all blessed for that. In a little summary, Helene always divided her life, and you can look it up in Wikipedia that she divided her life, that in the 70s, she was in process art. In the 80s, she did anti-nuclear art. And in the 90s, she was going to just devote to God, but 1 decade wasn't enough. She needed 2, and really she took 3. So it took her 3 decades until she died in 2020, where she really dealt with God and all the issues that she had as an Orthodox Jew, and later on, different kind of Jew, in her artwork. So I really began my relationship with her in 2008, where I found her, I think, on internet. And then we spent many, many hours in the West Beth apartment buildings in New York City, just talking and trying to figure out what works I could actually bring to Israel at not a great cost, and how we could do it. And we were able to bring 3 of her installations that we built, a lot of it here in this country. I'm in Ein Harod, in the museum in Ein Harod. And in 2012, together with Dr. David Sperber, we curated an exhibition called Matronita, Jewish Feminist Art, where we created about 15 artists, Americans, Europeans, and Israelis. And it really was groundbreaking because there wasn't such a thing as Jewish feminist art. And now today, there are so many institutions and so many galleries and so many things happening in Israel. So I'm very happy that we kind of, moved that. But she really was the grande dame of this whole group of women. And she stayed with us for a few weeks in Ein Harod, and she built together these installations. And each of the installations had previously been in American museums. And here we kind of tweaked it and did it differently. Like the piece that we're showing now, which is her notebooks. These notebooks in America look totally different. And, I had to find 54 notebooks here in Israel. And I'll read you what she writes about it, because I think the way she says it, and these are empty notebooks. The installation is called Mrs. Rashi and Mrs. Rambam. I'm sure they had something to say. And this is a piece of it. If I go to my next, can I get to my next slide? I don't know why I can't see anything on the bottom here.
I try the arrow keys.
Yeah, but I don't have any arrow keys here.
On your keyboard, no arrow keys?
Oh, you mean on the keyboard?
Yes, on the keyboard.
Okay. So this is the actual whole piece. So it's the 54 notebooks in the center and her text on the side. And her text really, the text that she wrote in this chalk, and we really literally chalked every single word here in Ein Harod. I begin turning in my notebooks on the 54 chapters of the 5 books of Moses, searching for any notes I could have taken in my school days at the Shalama School for Girls in Borough Park and the Midrashah High School in Borough Park. Notes on the words of my foremothers and their daughters and their daughters, as it is written, Vishinantam Livanecha, and you shall teach this to your children. But in lesson after lesson on the 54 chapters, there was no woman's commentary for me to write down, no woman's principle or benediction for me to memorize. I turn my head from side to side. I turn the pages from side to side. My head blank, the pages blank. I say, well, let there be white. For it is good, if only to acknowledge what we will never know. And then she gives the whole list, their yosher, justice, their minhagim, their customs, their tefillah. And I think about it, that, you know, she did this in 2012, and today, I think there are so many women out there who are Talmud scholars, Torah scholars. I think that we really have moved in this department. And this was a beautiful piece done so well, and we actually still own it. The next piece, no, okay. Her next installation was her marriage bed. So her marriage bed, okay, so in the Matronita, there were many different issues. So Torah learning was obviously one topic that, you know, in Jewish feminism. And then there was a lot of women who dealt with sexuality in Judaism. And this piece was one of the main pieces in a main room. And you can see it's a bed. It's actually a kibbutz bed. We had to, like, you know, totally, do a little different, it was different than it was in the other museums. In any case, we have her marriage bed is in the center, and it's surrounded by Xeroxes of the months of her marriage. She was married at 18, and I think her husband died when she was 30. So she was a very short marriage, and she had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And every single month of her life, when she menstruated, when she had clean days, when she gave birth, and if there were days, you know, there's a different amount of days that you have to wait after a boy and after a girl. All these are marked on the Xeroxes surrounding the bed. And on the bed, the blanket is actually made of badika cloths. Badika cloths are like handkerchiefs that are really, you know, made to, you know, go into your vagina to make sure there's no more blood left at the end of the clean days. And what's so interesting is that I had 3 artists in this exhibition that were doing shows, one from Europe, one from America, one from Israel, with shows made out of these badika cloths. In America, the badika cloths are rectangle, and in Israel, they have like a tail on them, and very different. And everyone had took it into different places, but hers was, you know, this monthly cycle. And then she had a projection on the bed, where she talks about the monthly cycle on and on and on, you know, every day, every month, every week. And that was the second installation in her work in the museum. Here you could see the Xeroxes that we actually built that wall so that you could hang the Xeroxes on the wall, and you could see the X's, the time when she's menstruating and the clean days. And the last piece in that show in Matronita was her God piece. So she's very famous, I think, for knowing that she took the entire Bible and she put on top of the Bible a layer of like plastic, and she took a pink marker, not a marker, pink madgish highlighter, and she highlighted all the places in the Bible that either there was misogyny for women, or either the women were missing, or either there was something terrible that shouldn't be said, and she pinked it all out. And that was an exhibition in the Jewish Museum in New York. And here, she just, that same idea of that pink, and you could see the little video on the right side, you could see the little video of her hand pinking those texts. And on the left side, you see the little line in the word God, G-O-D, but you know, we always have that line. And so she did this big show also in the Jewish Museum of justice and a big court, and women should be, feminists should be in the court. And she just took that little tiny little space, and she made it this pink line. And she calls this work Ner Tamid. Ner Tamid is the eternal light in the synagogue that is always there. And this was our eternal light in the museum. I loved it. And it was just so poetic and so beautiful. Here's another, here you could see it without all the wires. So then, in, when was it? 2017, in the Jerusalem Biennale, David Sperber, who wrote half of his doctorate is on Helene Aylon, I think, And he really wanted us to do another exhibition. And Helene said, I have one more thing to say. I must bring this to Israel. And that was a whole nother, as everybody knows, works in the Biennale. It was a hard thing, how to bring it and how to move it. All crazy, but she had to do it. And so we got a room in the Museum of the Underground of the Jewish Resistance where we got a little cell, like one cell, which I thought was so amazing. I mean, as soon as we got that cell, I said, we're definitely doing the show. And so she took the 10 Commandments, and the second commandment in the 10 Commandments, and she had this sculptural form of the 10 Commandments. And then you have this video projection of her, again, taking her pink highlighter and highlighting the second commandment where it says that you should not, obviously should not make a sculpture, but also El Kana Paked Avon Avot Al Banim Val Shleshim, where she says, God is a jealous God, and he visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, meaning these poor children, you know, they have to absorb the sins of their fathers. And she thought, I have to finish, I have to change that, that cannot be. And she writes, if I have sinned, that sin is my own. If my father has sinned, that sin is his own. If you have sinned, that sin is your own. It is not the sin of the newborn babe who smiles as the sun comes out. It is not the sin of the yet unborn still crouching inside the womb. It is not the sin of the child on the bike or the child on the swing or the child on the school bus eager to go to school or the child waiting to graduate. There is a holiday called Simchat Torah, which translates joy of the Torah. Should I rejoice on this holiday? Should I dance with the Torah as it is the custom, or should I mourn? And so this piece she had to do, and it was really the last time that we were together. This is my last slide of her, and it's the last picture I took of Helene. And I always thought this is the strangest thing, because she's standing next to a man. He happens to be a very famous Jewish educator in Israel, Rabbi Benji Levine. He's the son of Rabbi Aryeh Levin. He's a really famous guy. He's a funny guy, and you can see how he's dressed. He's kind of dressed like, you know, like a hip chassid. And there she is, the two of them. He looks like a regular chassid, and she looks like a regular, like, frum lady that came from Borough Park, you know, which, like, she was dressed. And this was my last moment, and I said, I think she would love that would be the way I ended my whole relationship with her. Anyhow, Helene, I loved her, and I miss her.
Thank you so much, Dvora. This was awesome. And she's such a great artist.
I just want to mention, I put in the chat that she won the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Women's Caucus. I believe it was 2018 because we were in New York that year. And also she has written a memoir. It is available online. She wrote it, you know, and I did enjoy meeting her at the caucus conferences twice, both when she got her award and another time when she did her book signing. So I actually have 2 copies of that book, and it's a good read. You'll learn all about those years in that book, and it includes photographs of a lot of the pieces. So I suggest that.
Thank you.
Dvora, thank you so much. It's also wonderful just hearing you and seeing you again. The last 2 pieces you showed, one on the second commandment, and the one on of her pinking out passages of Torah, are all clearly protest art. As a matter of fact, the one you talked about in the Jewish Museum, the baked in. I kind of had a question. The marriage bed. Can you characterize that? Is that protest? Is that celebration? Is that documentation?
I would say protest.
Ah, okay. So, okay, well, forgive my denseness then.
Definitely protest.
Definitely protest.
A lot of documentation, which is a pretty incredible documentation of your entire life.
Oh, of course.
Of your entire marriage life. But definitely, I think it was a protest.
Okay, thank you.
Chana.
Yes, so I also was interested in the marriage bed and had a similar question, not so much of whether it was protest, but, you know, to see this singular bed, which of course, you know, I understand the you know, the idea between a separate bed, but then with this coverlet that is over draping it and falling onto the floor, and clearly meant for to cover a larger bed, right? That the marital bed that's there seems to not represent the actual marital bed. It is only a single individual bed that's covered with some sort of blanket that, you know, made out of these badikat cloths that should cover a larger entity. So I'm wondering if there's any more that could be said about that piece. It really is quite perplexing as to what exactly the narrative is there.
Well, so that's interesting. I think it was symbolic of a bed. You know, we had to get a bed. The bed that she had when she exhibited this, I don't know in which museum in America she did, but it was probably a larger bed. So we got a kibbutz bed that we had from somewhere, and we used it as a bed. The idea was bed. It didn't, you know, it wasn't 2-1. That wasn't what she was talking about.
Okay. That definitely clarifies something for me.
So it was like a technical thing that we found the kibbutz bed, and you're right. The blanket was a little too big for the bed that we found.
Right. So for me, that took over, like that created a whole other narrative about, right, these two beds that may have been there, but now there's only one with this overflowing blanket.
Right.
So it kind of added another layer, but it's interesting now to know that that was not intentional.
Right.
Can I just continue the conversation? And because it's interesting. I mean, both these artists, both Rachel and Helene, are dealing with in rather similar or parallel subject matter. But I'd like to hear other people's comments. Rachel takes, when she finds things in Judaism that she is uncomfortable with or angry about or finds to be problematic, she'll make an object in which the object, the ritual object, becomes, as it were, a tikkun. You know, I'm going, as it were, I'm going to show you, we're going to make a woman's tallis that's going to express this, or even the even in its way the hand towels, right? Whereas Helene's work, at least the work that you showed, is more of a very, very loud and pointed and sometimes shocking protest. But and it's obviously it's two not different ways to approach the problems of matriarchy and the way Judaism is structured, but it's also one wonders if is there a third way? Have you seen other artists deal with this? But they're really in dialogue, is what I want to say, and I want to hear what other people have to say about it.
Yeah, and I think she was in dialogue with a lot of the artists that were exhibiting with the exact objects. You know, a woman was dealing with badika cloths, and she was dealing with fertility issues, you know, and all the problematics of fertility issues because of this whole clean days, and sometimes you're fertile not exactly on your clean day, and all those kinds of issues. Mm-hmm. So I think you know, I think many women artists are dealing with all the things that are hard, you know, and hard to live with, and halachically can be changed. And I think a lot of things have changed. And since then, and because women are again learning Torah and learning Talmud and learning, and so they become advising other women how to solve all these issues, these, you know, these sexual fertility issues that have in Judaism. And I think that this, you know, she did this a while ago, but these are issues that, you know, till today they exist and they need to be solved. So,
and but by the way, I would add not just women. I'm kind of sad that on this call there's well over 50 people. I think I counted maybe 6 men, and you know, this is not to intrude, as it were, but this is not just a woman's issue, right? Judaism is for the Jewish people, and it is for all kinds of Jewish people. And we very well know now that there are not just 2 genders that you talk about. There are certainly more. And you know, I'm trying to deal with this stuff in my own paintings and trying to take narratives in which women are extremely assertive and are really the drivers of the narrative. But the dialogue has to be continued to stay open. That's all my comment on that.
I wonder if some of this is also the way it's being done. is a generational difference in the way we are reacting to these issues with art, possibly. Just an idea that, you know, she comes from the time period of the strong feminist movement and protest movement, and then brought that into her Jewish pieces. Whereas some other artists, or, you know, the other artists presenting today are a little bit different, possibly generationally.
Thank you so much. It was just an amazing presentation. I introduce Billha Zussman, which is the next presenter, Israeli born, works at the Jewish Historical Museum in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in the educational department. She's currently working on 2 graphic novels, in addition to her art sculptures and installations. She was the co-curator of the Jewish Art Salon exhibit Spinoza Merano of Reason in Amsterdam in 2019, which was awesome. So go ahead, Billha, it's all yours.
I would like to start with silence, with the silence of the sirens. A public debate about exclusion of women from public spaces has come to view with the refusal of religious soldiers to attend official Israel Defense Force event which featured women singing. A soldier adhere the strict interpretation called Be'isha erva. This must translate as a voice of a woman is like nakedness or public region. An Orthodox rabbi told the soldier among his disciples that finding himself facing a woman singing, he should shut his eyes and use earplugs. This reaction reminded me of the epic poem, The Odyssey, and the story of Kafka, The Silence of Sirens. In a short text, Kafka revisits the myth of the siren. In the sirens become mute, and Ulysses chooses to stop wax in his ears, go deaf to meet the sirens. Now the sirens have still more fatal weapon than their songs, namely their silence. And though admittedly, such a thing has never happened, still it is conceivable that someone might escape their singing, but their silence never. Ulysses and the Orthodox rabbi are thinking of nothing other than solving the dilemmas by using wax, ignorant of the power of sirens and their silence. So we can go to the next image, yeah, still the next images are still images from an animation film I'm working now on. The first one, a woman kippah, constructed of 2 kippahs resembling a headphone, and headphone and head helmet. On each kippah, on the left and on the right, I embroidered the names of Dvora and Miriam, talking about women singing in the Bible. The next image, the silence of the sirens, an outraged silence. And I used here audio cassette tapes. On the left, audio cassette tapes and a noise reducing sponge. You can't even see her face. And I made, you can see earrings from a part of the tape. And talking about jewels, this is the last part of my presentation. The next So as you see, again, silent of the sirens, outraged silence, slowly, slowly, she's covered with all these tapes, with all these silence. And the next one. And what you can see here is a mechitza. On the left side, still watching the head of this lady with her woman kippah and the mechitza, and the left only the mechitza, all made of the same audio tapes. No voice, no sound, silence, a very powerful one. The weight of words, so from the silence of words to the weight of words. Last year I curated with a good colleague of mine an exhibition, The Weight of Words, in Amsterdam, in the Oranje Kerk, the Orange Church. And here's some of the photos from a new series photos inspired by Hannah Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Origin of Evil. Arendt's book, as well as a subject, are great, are being hung and weighted on a hook. You can see here the book and weight hooks. And what I'm doing here, I'm asking a question. Who is on the hook? Hannah Arendt, ideas, book, the subject of a book. The book Eichmann in Jerusalem, The Origin of Evil, has been controversial for decades, and Hannah Arendt was banned from public consciousness for decades because she dared to ask provocative questions. There were a lot of problem and frictions with the Jewish world, especially in Israel. The location of the images is a dark, hidden place. It is as if one is trying to hide from the uncomfortable, confronting question raised by this book. Please, the next image. Yeah, thanks. Simultaneously, we watch a pile of book next to an empty bookshelf. And again, a question, ready to undergo the same treatment. And I used here a very sharp light. It's almost a sort of a hole in the photo, and I called it also interrogation room and libraries on trial. The next image, please. The Origin of Evil, interrogation room, libraries on trial, and you can see here on the ground all the books, maybe awaiting the same treatment as the three of book hanged here. This next one. Yeah. The tree of knowledge, the freedom to be free, a known essay by Hannah Arendt. And what you can see here, and a woman's shoe, high heels wrapped in bandages, and again these weight hooks, and on one of them hang the book of Hannah Arendt, The Freedom to be Free. From the tree of knowledge, well, to whom other than to Eve, Chava. And in a lot of interpretation of the Bible creation story, Eve has come to represent the harmful stereotype of a woman, untrustworthy, seductive, evil, the one responsible for the fall of mankind and the existence of sin, expelled from the Garden of Eden and sent linea recta to the dark pages of history. The only explanation, as far as I'm concerned, that does full justice to this lady to show her to be as smart as she is, because Eve was told the apple was desirable for gaining wisdom and made an autonomous choice to accept the fate of knowledge. So as far as I'm concerned, she earns a Medal of Honor. And from me to her, a brooch I named Hot Potato. What I did here, it's a real potato. It's still a concept. And I carved on the potato, on the apple, sorry, on the apple, I carved the word hot potato, and you can see or part of it, tapuach adama, cham. Well, knowledge can be terrifying. Hot potatoes can be terrifying for all of us. And I choose for a jewelry object as a sort of non-verbal communication and extension of one's personality and identity, sometimes tough, always clear message. By the way, a lot of very strong women choose for this way of communication. One of them, Madeleine Albright, used her brooches and her jewelry as part of her communication with world leaders. I hope part of you know the story. So I decided to design some brooches, not only for Eve, but I have a whole list for women from the Bible, less known women, and I started with Eve, the hot potato, and you can see on the right side, burned matches.
The piece with the tape really spoke to me, and it reminded me of when you have a dead lake, algae grows and it chokes out everything. And this reminds me of the algae that grows when, you know, things are missing that should be there, other, you know, biodiversity, and that's the woman's voice that's missing, that's allowing for this kind of choking growth. That was my take on it. Would anyone like to comment?
I also, Judith, was so struck by this tape, and you know, the way that it really enables the piece to become such a duality, because you know, the whole notion of there's a voice but it's on tape. Well, what does that mean? And it's broken down, of course, into this 0-1 paradigm, right? Of it's digital. And so you kind of are left with, well, it's removed, right? You have the removal of the voice, but it is there and it's accessible maybe only through some sort of Kedusha process, this 0-1, where there is only one. Anyway, it got me thinking, and I really very much admire this piece.
And also it's an archaic technology at this point. So that's also interesting to think about, the idea of silence.
I decided also a brush for myself, because I'm allowed to cook. I can't cook. So I decided everything I do ends in a disaster. So I made a brush for myself called My Flop Jewish Chicken Soup.
Now you had something that you said about these sieves, the strainers that you had used in earlier work. Can you talk about that a little bit?
About what?
Is this one of those strainers?
Yeah.
And you said that it's a metaphor for women in a way. Can you tell about that?
It's not a metaphor for women. It's a metaphor for something that is letting all the junk through.
It's beautiful.
Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe are you saying that to clean, to sort of make the broth clear?
Yeah.
Yes.
And let all and what is left over are the pearl, are the most beautiful things. So if you remember my work with sieving, being sieve, you let the more negative whatever idea material get try to lose it and keep, as we see here, the pearls, and chicken fit here.
First of all, I found this very interesting, this art. And I saw a beautiful irony in the piece you made with the headphones made of male yarmulkes, male kippot.
Yeah.
But then also the tape, to me, it looks like hair. And if people bellyache about hearing the voice of a woman, you made so much hair, which is usually also a reason for belly aching, and you have to cover it and hide it, etc., etc., etc. So this is more hair than anybody can handle, and I love the irony.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
wonderful.
So I have one question for you, Billha, before you disappear again. So there was this potato images with, I saw that had some like a little bandage,
Yeah.
What is this bandage? It's very tiny, but I saw it's repeating in another piece. So
the bandage, you need for the freedom, the freedom to be free. And I used it also with the, the concept for the brooch. Well, you need one match and the whole world is on fire. Well, we still experience it in the world. So the apple, hot potato, and one match, and everything is on fire. And it is also, knowledge is so dangerous, and Eve knew it, but she dared to make a decision. Not that easy, because see what happened to her, other women, see what they done to Maria Magdalena. So it has to do, there's also some irony. I use an apple and carved hot potato, but in Hebrew, you can make more use of or play with word, because tapuach etz, tapuach adama, Adam, Dam, Adama. So that's, I want to go further with it, but it has to do knowledge, and the result is what you see here, the small bandage and the matches were already burnt.
Thank you so much, Billha. Your work always makes me think about it more and more after I see it, because there is so much in it. Sometimes it looks so simple, and then it's so complicated actually and deep. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you too.
I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank Dvora Liss and Rachel Kanter for participating, and the Jewish Art Salon, of course, and all of you that come again and again and ask your brilliant questions and support us. So thank you, Jewish Art Salon and Yona, of course, and Judith and our team, Chana, Elias, and Cheselyn, Amato. And thanking also Canvas for their support in this program. The next program, Biblical Narratives, will be on March 20 with Richard McBee and Robert Brandwain. And thank you everybody for being here tonight.